Hey guys, today I'm back with HotS number 3, and today I'm going to be talking about knowing your role on a team. So, one of the most important things that comes with playing team games, especially these MOBAs, is that you have to know what your role is on the team. Um, quick anecdote, I come from a StarCraft 2 background, um, and so I'm used to kind of doing everything. I'm used to micromanaging every single little thing and taking care of everything myself. And so when I moved to Heroes as my first kind of team experience, it was a little bit difficult because I had to kind of restrict myself to only 1/5 of the role in order to effectively do my job for the team and not step on other people's toes and contribute to the team overall. Um, a lot of people, I think, when they first come into a hero brawler or a MOBA of any kind of game like Heroes of the Storm or Dota 2 or League of Legends, they end up not really clearly knowing what they're supposed to be doing on the team, um, and not really understanding how they need to fulfill the purposes of the team in order for the whole team as a whole to succeed. So, today I'm just going to go over some of the main attributes that you consider when you're trying to fulfill your role. Um, it's a little bit difficult to tell what you're supposed to be doing in Heroes of the Storm. If you compare it to a game like League of Legends, League of Legends has pretty clearly defined roles, which is somewhat a kind of a side effect of them just having a settled meta. You have a support, which obviously just only does support things. They don't get last hits, they don't get kills. They just support the rest of the team. And then you have the ADC, who it's their sole job to just auto attack a lot and get a lot of damage done over time. And then in mid lane, you usually have some sort of assassin. And then top lane is either a tank or a bruiser. And jungle, obviously, it's their role to just stay in the jungle and kill jungle things as well as get ganks. They have pretty clearly defined roles. But when we get into Heroes of the Storm, those roles are a lot more fluid and don't really make as much sense. Um, the roles that Blizzard's defined are pretty good. Um, Assassin, Warrior, Specialist, and Support. Those are pretty good roles, but there's still a lot of fluidity in between those roles. So think, for instance, say you're a Passadar. Um, Passadar, obviously, you are a supportive person. You do shields and take care of people, but you also have damage as well. So you also, in some ways, are kind of bleeding over into the assassin role, especially if you get Archon, you're bleeding over into the assassin role, where you're doing a lot of damage, and it's your job in fights to put out a lot of damage, rather than just taking care of allies the entire time. So that's just one example of many. There's a lot of ways that the roles kind of bleed into each other and do different things. So the most important thing in Heroes, though, is defining what you need to be doing at any particular time, not necessarily what your role is permanently, except for healer. So I've amassed a list of attributes that I think are good in determining which role you need to be in. This is in no way completely exhaustive or anything like that. It's just all I can think of off the top of my head. The first one to consider is always, am I a healer? Am I purely there for support? And this is one that people get wrong a lot. Because if you're playing like Uther or Tassadar, not even Tassadar, if you're playing like Uther or Karazim or Malfurion or Rhaegar, and you're like the solo support on your team, it is your job to make sure everyone else on the team gets healed. So if you're ever off on your own by yourself, you're not really helping the team as effectively as you would be if you were there healing them, right? Um, there are some exceptions to this rule. Like for instance, if you need to soak a lane or something real quick, or if no one else is up and you have to go capture a watchtower or something like that, and then you can obviously go there as a healer. But mostly it's your job to just take care of other people. So you shouldn't be split pushing. You shouldn't be clearing out waves by yourself. You shouldn't be trying to take mercenaries by yourself because none of those things help the rest of the team. So that's probably one of the clearest distinctions. Whereas if you're a solo healer, like you know exactly where you're supposed to be. In terms of double healer compositions, it's a little bit more fluid. But still, for the most part, if you are one of the higher healing heroes, out of the double supports, if you're playing medic or Uther or Karazim, well, actually Karazim can. If you're playing medic or Uther or Malfurion, obviously your job is to heal people. That's pretty much all they do. Karazim can build a little bit differently. People like Tassadar, people like Tyrande can build a little bit differently and go a little bit more damage oriented. And so it's not their job necessarily to heal everybody all the time. But if you are the main support on your team, that is what you need to be doing. That's your role. Another thing to consider when you're looking at your role is tankiness. Tankiness is a pretty straightforward idea that dictates where you want to be positioned. So if we think of it like kind of like a sliding scale from like so Stitches is the most tanky that you can get, and the least tanky is going to be something like let's say Vala. I would say technically Abathur or Murky, but they're non-factors, all right? So say Vala to Stitches, right? That's kind of your sliding scale of your tankiness, and wherever you fit on that scale is approximately how far up you should be during team fights, how quickly you need to get to team fights, etc. And so, for instance, when you consider, say it's a 5v5 tribute fight, say a tribute spawns on Cursed Hollow, and your team is running up to get to the tribute. If you are the first person there, and you're Vala, you're probably doing it wrong, because a fight could break out at any point in time. If you're leading the team as Vala, then there's a very good chance that you can suddenly get surrounded by 5 enemy heroes and picked off, or so much damage, you take so much damage that you're just not useful to the following team fight that occurs. So it's really important that you kind of adjust that. Like you see that you're leading your team towards the tribute, and then you just back up and put yourself in place behind the tank. Because there's no reason for you to be all the way out in the front. It's a really good way to die unnecessarily when your team needs you to be alive. Excuse me. That also occurs whenever you're thinking about whenever you're dealing with any kind of sieges. If you're having to deal with like a grave golem on haunted mines or a punisher on the infernal shrines, you always, as a squishier character, you want to stay further back, farther away from that, so you can't be jumped on by the punisher and die from that, and you can't be killed by poke from the other team. Whereas you have your tanks up in the front that can tank some of that. And that can get really annoying when you have a bunch of like squishier melee assassins like Zeratul and Illidan. That can get frustrating at times to kind of force yourself to be back and not do anything for a little while. But it's the proper thing to do, and it will change. It will make you a lot more effective in your role and help out the team more. Next thing to consider is damage output. So damage output is, I just thought of a new one. I'm gonna add it to the bottom. So damage output. Another big thing in determining your role is figuring out where you fit in terms of damage. Kind of a backward sliding scale if you think of Vala, Kale, Jaina as the top end and Stitches as the low end for damage. That kind of dictates where you need to be rotating, what you need to be attacking, things like that. So, for instance, if we need to kill a boss is pushing down one of the lanes, it's really important that you have high damage heroes like Vala or Illidan or Kale. Let me get my page full of heroes so I can look at it. There we go. Or even heroes like Karazim or some of the tanks like Arthas that do a lot of damage. You want to make sure that you have a lot of damage to deal with a Grave Golem and kill it pretty quickly, so it doesn't push down a lot of stuff. What you don't want is if you have to make a choice between if you have, like, for instance, on Haunted Mines, if you have the Grave Golem and you're trying to figure out who should defend and who should attack, you don't want people defending that are people like, you don't want to have a solo defending Uther, which, you know, we talked about earlier, is you don't want to split that away from your team anyway. You don't want to have like a solo defending Stitches or a solo defending Diablo. Those things just, they don't do enough damage, or solo defending etc. Like, there's just not enough damage there that you can actually kill it effectively and make it useful for your team. You always want to have somebody who has high damage output to deal with those sorts of things, and that's pretty important to figuring out your role. Another really obvious thing that helps you determine where you need to be in fights and your positioning is also the ranged versus melee camp. So if you are a ranged character, you typically want to stay further back. You want to stay further back, stay safe, and just kind of poke from afar. On the contrary, if you're a melee hero, usually you're kind of a little bit further in the front. For some heroes, say Illidan, Sonya, even Arthas to some extent, or Tannis, it's more useful for you not necessarily be in the front, but to be on the side, so that you can get into the front really quickly. And that gets into a whole bunch of initiation versus flanking stuff. It's very complicated, but you'll find that you have a lot more success with melee assassins who kind of do flanks rather than staying up in the front, because they want to be up in the front line. They want to be doing damage, because obviously they can't poke if they're way behind the tanks. But they want to make sure they get a good angle onto the back line as well. So that's pretty important. Vulnerability. I think this kind of goes back to tankiness, but also has to do a little bit with escapes. If you think about vulnerability as, say for instance, you have something like the medic. The medic has absolutely no escape. She has no way to get out if she needs to. So if she gets jumped on by a couple members, if she gets stun trained, she's pretty much dead. Like, there's nothing that's gonna happen. Like, she's just gonna die, and you can't save her. But someone like Vala or someone like Sylvanas, they have a sort of escape. So even if they do get caught, they can still get away because they have those kind of gap closers that allow them to escape. Maybe you're about to get storm bolted as Vala, and then you just vault out of it, or you just vault barely out of range of the enemy team that's about to kill you. But this also goes, to some degree, this also relates to tanks as well. So there are some tanks that have really bad escapes. Like Artanis doesn't have any kind of escape. Arthas doesn't really have any kind of escape. He can root people with Chilling Blast. Is that what it's called? What Howling Blast? Howling Blast. Got it. He can root people with the Howling Blast and walk away, but it's not that reliable. Diablo has no real escape. Um, but there are some other tanks that are obviously amazing at escaping, like Murden, Dwarf Toss out, totally super easy. Um, ETC can slide out and stun anybody on his way. That's a pretty big deal, especially if he mixes that with uh, the face smelt talent that works his W. He can W, knock everybody back, and they're slow, and then he just slides away, totally safe. Leoric, Wraithwalk is amazing. You can get away with that. Things like that. You can also apply that to some melee assassins. So, for instance, Butcher has absolutely no escape. He's awful at escaping. So once he's in a fight, like he's in a fight, like he has to continue attacking. To some degree, Thrall is the same way. Um, but at the same time, you also have people like Illidan and people like Zeratul that can get up really close into the back line and assassinate some people and then jump back out without being in too much danger of dying. So it all depends on your vulnerability, your survivability, how well you can escape, things like that. That dictates what your role is, team fight, and where you need to be. Another thing that's important is interrupts. When you think about your role in a team fight, you want to really think about, do I have interrupts, and do they have stuff that needs interrupting? So very obvious easy one is there's a Lily on the other team. She takes Jug of 1,000 Cups. I believe it's what the name of it is. She takes that as her ultimate, and you need somebody to either stun or just stop her, silence her, whatever. Obviously, my favorite, just straight up counter pick to Lily is just get a Sylvanas on your team and just Wailing Arrow. As soon as she starts it, weep, and then you don't have Wailing Arrow, or you don't have the 1,000 Cups anymore. So that's a pretty big deal to know what exactly your role is in terms of stuns and interrupts, and what you can stun and interrupt. You can also use things like, for instance, when I play Illidan, basically I know that I have a stun on any kind of invisible person, and I can chase them indefinitely. So if I play against a Nova, I'll always go the hunt. And as soon as Nova appears, I just automatically the hunt onto her face and just chase her down and kill her, because she can't hide after that. No way for her to hide when she gets stunned and chased down like that. It also somewhat compares to the peel that you get from some of the ultimates. So, for instance, you have Zeratul's Void Prison, Devouring Maw on Zagara, and Force Wall from Tassara. Those are the three big heroics that allow you to divide up fights and take them in smaller chunks. And that's really important for peeling for your allies and taking some people out of the fight while you focus on others, things like that. That kind of goes along the idea of interrupts, that it's your job to interrupt the enemy team, and break up their positioning so that you can deal with them a little bit easier. And also those can all be used to interrupt a lot of things. Also Entomb technically counts, Entomb on late work. So for instance, if we think back to C9 versus, I think it was Tempo Storm, but I can't remember. But it was the first time we saw Entomb used defensively. King Caffeine dropped down an Entomb that was perpendicular to the team and stopped the Butcher from charging in. and he wasted Furnace Blast entirely on the side of Entomb. You can interrupt combos like that. You can do the same kind of thing with Butcher using Void Prison, using Force Wall, using Devouring Maw. You can use those things as well. Also, if you have like an Azebo and you don't have anybody who can easily stun him, you can just have Zagara kind of like waddle over and use Devouring Maw on him, and that'll cancel it as well. So any kind of thing like that is useful. Displacement is also part of that, but there's a weird hierarchy. I'm not gonna get into it now, but there's a weird hierarchy that some ultimates will be interrupted and some won't. I don't know. The next thing to consider is wave clear. So wave clear is essentially how quickly you clear waves. If you're someone like I know I always come back to Vala, but Vala's my go-to. If you're someone like Vala or Jaina or Kale, or even Johanna or Leoric, like you clear lanes super easy. That's like all you do. Or Sylvanas. Sylvanas is amazing. You just walk into the lane and it dies. Especially after you get to like level 4, 7 plus. There's just you don't have any problem with clearing waves. And that dictates where you need to be on the map. So say for instance, you're on a map and you look at down at the mini map and you realize that there's a bunch of minions pushing in your top lane. If you're someone like Uther or someone who has really bad wave clear, like let's say most of the supports have really bad wave clear, so that's why. Okay, Nova's a good one. Nova's a great one. Nova's awful at clearing waves. Say you're Nova or Uther or Lily. It's not your job to go up there. That's not part of your role because you don't have wave clear. You can go up there and soak if your team has nothing else to do. For the next like minute, like it's not your job to go clear it. You definitely in that kind of case you would just kind of ping it to your team and be like, hey, this needs clearing. And if no one responds, like you type it in and be like, hey, can someone clear top? And if no one does anything, well, that's not your fault. Like you may lose a keep from that, but that's not your fault because your job is not with the wave clear. It's to support the team or to be a good tank for your team in case they get into a fight, or to assassinate heroes if they get caught out of position if you're Nova. It's not your job to go clear that wave. So if you are someone like Sylvanas or Vala, or Johanna, anybody who has good wave clear, and you look at the minimap and you see, oh, like there's a wave up there that needs clearing. That should be in your kind of thought process, like, oh, I have good wave clear, that's where I need to go. And if one of your other allies goes up there who has really shitty wave clear, like an Uther or a Nova, just go up there with them because the sooner that you free them up to help the team, then the sooner then you can all group up together. So it's a really big deal to know how much wave clear you have and be able to respond to where you need to go in order to deal with that wave clear and help your team to the most out of what they need to get done. And kind of alongside wave clear, you also have mercenary clear. So there are some people who can do mercenaries well. There's some people who can do mercenaries well and quickly, and there are some people who just straight up do mercenaries badly. So for instance, if you think you have someone who does it extremely well and very quickly is Illidan. Illidan is probably the number one mercenary killer person. He can clear. You don't need to know these numbers. I just actually did the math. I actually tested this out back when I was writing my Illidan guide. But he can clear an ogre camp in about 25 seconds on average at level 4. So, and he only takes like 200, 300 damage total. So he doesn't take a lot of damage from it, and he clears it really fast. So he's really, really good at doing that. Um, some other ones that are pretty good. Sonya's pretty good. Um, probably trying to think of some other ones. Karrigan might be okay, but you have to blow a lot of mana, so that's a little mana inefficient. Auto attack Vala is good because she can clear that pretty quickly without wasting too much mana or losing too much health. But typically, or Butcher's also great at it. But for the most part, most people are not amazing at taking mercenary camps. Um, most people are pretty good, but slightly inefficient. So if you think about someone like Sylvanas is a great example. Sylvanas can take an ogre camp without taking any damage at all. That's amazing. That's great. You know what the problem is? It actually takes like a full minute for her to do the camp because she doesn't do a lot of damage. And so it's not actually that efficient for her to solo a camp by herself. If you think about someone like Nazeebo's really good at Nazeebo's amazing at clearing camps, by the way. He does them fast and well. Especially if he goes Gargantuan, because Gargantuan just slams and kills everything. Someone who is kind of alright but inefficient, non-auto attack Vala. If you have like W build or Q build Vala, she can kill the ogre camp, but she usually has to an ogre camp or even like a night camp. She can usually kill it, but she has to waste a ton of mana and usually loses more than half of her health in the process. So it's just not worth it. It's just not that good. Both the mages, Kale and Jaina, they melt camps pretty quickly, but I take that back. Kale before 13. After he gets chain bomb, he can pretty much clear night camps like it's nothing. But normally they can clear camps pretty quickly, but they end up taking a bit more damage than would otherwise be nice, and they end up spending a lot of mana trying to do so. So they're also not great, and any kind of tank is kind of like Sylvanas too. You can have a tank like Johanna or Chin, Diablo, etc. Leoric. They can do a camp pretty decently, and not take too much damage or use too much mana, but it just takes them a long time to do so. Next thing to think about is pushing power. This generally goes along with the with a specialist role, right? So you think of Zagara, Sylvanas, things like that. People who can push down lanes really easily. Obviously, if that's your role, that's mostly what you need to be doing is creating a lot of lane pressure and pushing into people's towers whenever you can, and kind of creating pressure points on the enemy's side of the map, so that they have to respond to it. Global presence is something to remember when considering your role. If you're someone like Right Wing or Abathur, Falstad, etc., you can Blitz Soak and get back in time to help with your team. You also have things like Artanis' ultimates that allow him to be anywhere on the map and still use his abilities. So global presence is pretty big when you consider like where do I need to be in relation to my team? Do I need to be right next to them, or do I need to be mostly on the way, or can I stay in lane and just like kind of jump to them, etc. So it's important that determines whether you stay behind and like clear a wave or push while your team is going for an objective. So some heroes have some very special roles, and I'm going to go over that really quickly. I'm running out of time a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit faster. But so like I was saying, global presence is really important. When you think about special roles, Abathur is one that comes up a lot. Abathur, especially on Sky Temple and Infernal Shrines, Those have very kind of predictable, even Cursed Hollow, those have very predictable places where people are going to be. You know that people are going to go towards the shrines or the temples. So you know that Abathur can freely soak in one of the lanes during that time while still helping out his team. But this also, to some degree, also extends to anybody who has a global presence. So, like I was saying earlier, Falstad, Brightwing, you could technically even say ETC Stage Dive, although the ETC Stage Dive split pushing thing is not really a thing. um, and I'm a little bit hesitant to say this, but I think if you are ahead with Artanis, you can start split pushing with him and use his ultimate to help out your team. Because, for instance, like the Purifier Beam is almost like having a fifth hero there. It's a lot of damage, so it's a pretty big deal. Um, that's only if you're ahead. I don't have confirmation on that, but I think that can work. Um, Another special role is the Lost Vikings. Obviously, whenever you're playing the Lost Vikings, your job is to split soak and get as much XP as possible. Um, Also, another thing that the Vikings stretch out to is taking the Garden Terror and the Dragon Knight on Garden Terror uh, and Dragonshire. They're excellent at taking one of those things, one of the summanables, because it only takes one of them, and the other two can still do things and split soak during the meantime. Also, Murky is pretty good at taking those as well because he's a fairly low threat otherwise, and it doesn't matter too much if he pushes up a little bit too far and then dies. It's not a huge deal because it's only 0.25. If you think about who else should take the Terror, I think this is an important time to think about this. When you're wondering about what the role on your team is, who should take the Terror or the Dragon Knight? Usually, you want to do the secondary tank. So whichever one isn't the main tank. So that's usually like Tyrael or Arthas or Nubarak. People of that nature, Artanis even. People who some are tanky, but not necessarily really important for your team. The main distinction is melee versus range. Technically, normally you want all of your ranged heroes to be behind the terror and kind of poke and let your terror work as kind of like a melee hero. So most of the time, melee heroes, tanks, and melee assassins end up getting it. First priority is the second tank. If you're running a solo tank composition, then usually the solo tank gets it. And sometimes, in rare cases, it goes to the melee assassin. So Illidan is really solid in it. You could say even Kerrigan. People not to put in it, don't put a healer. Because obviously, like, if you're solo healing, you're not doing your job if you're in the Garden Terror. And you also don't want to put people who the entire composition is centered around them. If you're running an Illidan composition or Butcher composition, it's just bad. Another really big thing is Tassadar and Sylvanas on Haunted Mines. Those are really big for opposite reasons. Sylvanas is really good at pushing down towers and can negate a bunch of damage from the towers towards the Grave Golem. So she always pushes with the Golem. Unless there's like a 100 Golem that's pushing down like a keep or whatever, she always pushes with the Golem. So when you're playing Sylvanas on that map, just think, oh, the Golems are up, I'm pushing. There shouldn't be a question in your mind. And on the flip side, you have Tassadar, who at level 1 has reinforced structure, has excellent shields, and does a decent amount of damage with Storm. So he should always be defending. And he could solo defend a 50 Skull Golem without taking any damage to the fort. Also, he has Mule, so he can defend it even further. It's amazing. Tassadar is an amazing defender on that map. So Those are pretty good roles, and they somewhat extend to other maps as well, but they're particularly strong in that map. That's something to keep in mind. So that pretty much wraps up everything I want to talk about. The main thing that I want to point out is that it's really important to know your role on the team because it helps you learn personally. It helps you learn and understand where you need to be and what you need to be doing at any point in time. And once you get like a kind of a general idea of where you need to be and what you need to be doing, you have some kind of groundwork, some basic rules for what you need to be doing. You spend a lot less time wandering around and not being sure where you're supposed to go. And as a result, your decision making becomes snappier and your rotations become a lot more crisp. So it's really important to do that. Um, and like I said earlier, a big part of knowing your role on the team is just helping the team do what's necessary for them. So when you're doing the correct, if everyone on the team is doing the things that they're supposed to be doing, the team is going to do a lot better. If you see someone who's not doing better, you can try to guide them along, but people may not always do the right thing. The most important thing is for you to take care of you and do what you're supposed to do. All right, well, that's pretty much it for now. Glad you tuned in. If you think I missed anything or you have any kind of criticism, please comment below. Let me know. All right, see you guys later.